What's the dumbest crap you've ever heard from someone who was completely serious? While working at a bookstore, I had a customer ask where we kept the new non-fiction while she was standing in front of our bestsellers. So I'm like, well, here, but also the entire right side of the store is basically non-fiction. What are you looking for? She says no, she wants the new non-fiction. UHH. Okay, are we talking cookbooks, science, art, history? No, non-fiction. The new book in the Lord of the Rings series. Yeah, so after I tell her Tolkien's been dead for a minute, I add that she's not looking for non-fiction. She argued and blows me off. Comes back a bit later holding God like she's about to rub this in my ignorant face. This? Where's the newest one? You're holding it. No, he wants the next one. Yeah, so does the rest of the fan base. She was not amused, and somehow she never even felt stupid. One of my former co-workers is completely, passionately, incontrovertibly convinced that the Sahara is what remains of the city of Atlantis. He spent about an hour following me around my department, explaining this video he saw on YouTube. It had to be legit, you see, because they talked about qubits. Another co-worker at the same company thought his hair grew from the opposite end. As in, hair doesn't grow from the scalp, but actually lengthens from the loose end. Unfortunately, I can't recount his logic because it was so absolutely confounding that I just deleted that memory file for my own sanity. A guy I used to work with started seeing a girl who was already pregnant. He told us with all seriousness, the doctor told me that because we've been having unprotected sex, my DNA has been passing on to the fetus, and so I will be the biological father of the baby. Next level evolution right there. Perhaps not the guy, but def the baby. My history teacher, before the event of Noah's Ark, animals were likely very massive. The animals who were not saved in the flood became fossilized rock and now are the giant rock formations we see today. He was referring to the rocks like Elephant Rock, Dolphin Island, EXC. He genuinely believed that these rocks that happened to resemble animals were actually animals. He showed us a 100+ page slideshow of rocks that looked like animals to prove his point. He's also a flat earther, doesn't believe in the moon landing, and thinks ancient Egyptians had airplanes. I was on jury duty in Gwadar and there was a college kid being questioned. They asked his major and he said anthropology, and when they asked him why he picked that major, he said with absolute utter seriousness, "Or he was the greatest actor in the history of the universe. I like Bigfoot. I know he's out there, and I wanna study him and stuff." Verbatim. I will never forget his words. I don't know how that many people were able to keep from laughing out loud. I know I almost failed. The kid could have just been trying to get out of jury duty. While working in Yellowstone, I heard a tourist ask, "So, when are they going to reintroduce gorillas back into the park?" A gay friend in college came up to me all excited telling me he finally lost his virginity and that his hymen broke. He refused to believe me when I told him he didn't have one. Oh geez, that reminds me of the patient who had a really hard time believing she didn't need to be checked for prostate cancer. You shouldn't ask for gift suggestions for a married woman you're friends with. That's a path to sin, and heck, Jesus will not forgive you. My former co-worker, who at the time was separated from her husband after getting caught cheating on him for the second time with a co-worker while living with and sleeping with another co-worker from a different department. We were discussing the ozone layer in a high school science class, and I had heard that ozone was actually toxic if breathed in, so I asked the teacher if this was true. A girl in my class who considered herself to be an environmentalist took offense to this and said ozone is what's keeping us alive, idiot. The teacher then confirmed that ozone is indeed toxic if breathed in. There's one not understanding situational goodness and badness. Ozone, good miles above your head, blocking UV rays. Bad in your lungs. Both can be and are true. Fun fact, freaking oxygen is toxic in high concentrations. Bet your schoolmate's head would have exploded if someone told her that. I had a woman call me to complain that her generator had been running for hours. I said that her power must be out. She said her power couldn't be out because her lights were on. Had to repeat myself 2 more times before she got it. In the military, had someone tell me, just because you're my supervisor and higher ranking than me doesn't mean I have to listen to you. Yes, it does. That's exactly what that means. That's pretty much the only thing that it means. Not only was the moon landing a hoax, but the moon itself does not exist and is merely a holographic projection. My 30-something nephew, who I swear used to be a normal person, I don't know what the frick happened to his brain. I got in an argument with a friend of mine who, at 21, insisted to the point of our friendship being severely damaged that you could get pregnant anally. When presented with the sad fact that this wasn't the case, he proceeded to rant about osmosis or something, and it turned to shouting, and I eventually got up and left because I was stupefied. I couldn't bring myself to talk to him for months. He was a good guy overall. It was just this one incredibly dumb thing that he and his girlfriend were very smug and unbelievably wrong about. To be clear, they weren't even virgins, or anything close to devoutly celibate. They were, for lack of a better term, freaks. They were just really freaking stupid people who thought they were the smartest in the room despite dropping out of high school and living in a one-bedroom apartment with 4 other teenagers who all managed to flunk out of the same group home. I'm included in that group, but I like to think I got better. Miss Girl was so surprised to learn that soldiers still exist and people still die in wars. The same girl that I had to reassure that no, unicorns, fairies etc aren't actually real. We were seniors in high school. I do remember when I was a kid, maybe 8 years old, and thinking that war was something the world had moved beyond and wasn't an accessory anymore. And then 9/11 and the Iraq War happened. My weirdo super religious, ergo does not lie, brother thinks there are lasers in the ionosphere created by the government that they use to start forest fires. One of my co-workers says she met Jesus and the devil in her garage and now she believes she's one of the horsemen of the apocalypse. She's 100% serious about that stuff. A girl I used to work with was pissed that her boyfriend only bought me 12 roses. He wouldn't even go all out for a dozen. What a jerk. Maybe she used to work at a bakery. This man in his late 40s was trying to convince me and my ex and our friend that Bigfoot was real, because of the way that trees fall down sometimes in a forest can only be explained by Bigfoot having done it somehow. So every time the 3 of us would see something like that when we went on a hike or something, we would say Bigfoot had done it. Hahaha. Best one I know is that the boulders on stumps were put there by Bigfoot while he's exercising. By my buddy's dad who's a logger. He knew dang well the loggers put those on the stumps to make them rot faster and get the rocks out of the way for the skidders. Do it. My kid thinks it's Bigfoot exercising. On the MLB, NBA, NHL, NFL playoffs, all divisions must be represented so that everyone has a geographically close team they can cheer for if their team is not in it. Does anyone cheer for a division rival for this reason? Absolutely not, though college football fans in general seem willing to root for their conference so it makes their team look better. Not to me personally, but my boyfriend who is Japanese and Filipino got stationed in NC. A lot of the people there have very big anti-China resentment, so when the topic of China comes up they bring up my boyfriend just because he's Asian. One time this white guy was ranting about China and said, "Acute's boyfriend is Chinese." Boyfriend, I'm not Chinese. White guy, but you're Asian. Boyfriend, that doesn't mean I'm Chinese. White guy, but I thought all Asians were Chinese. See, I thought this at like 7 years old. After learning Chinese and learning about the country, I question whether or not there is even such thing as Chinese. My brother and his then girlfriend spent about 30 minutes trying to convince me mermaids are real. They were serious. They saw real life footage of them. I don't really need to say it, but I will. It was CGI. My sister once told me that other drivers on the road always look at her funny when she pulls forward a little extra at a red light if there is room to let the person behind her turn right if they have their blinker on. She said they always do a double take and she assumed it was BC. They thought she was a little young to know it is polite to do that. I, unfortunately, had to break it to her that they were not looking at her. They wanted to see if traffic was clear for them to go. I literally pee myself laughing. I could not believe she legit thought this for years. A girl I went to high school with was upset because buying using cotton was cruel to rabbits. She also insisted eggs were dairy. She must have thought Peter Cottontail was literal. India's Prime Minister Modi explaining to a reporter why India sent its fighter planes to Pakistan at that particular time, said, and I quote, "Military professionals were worried and discussing if they should do the surgical strike at that time. Modi said, there are clouds, we can get the benefit, as in fighter planes will not be visible. I kid you not. This is Modi on national television explaining the rationale behind choosing that time to do a surgical strike." A co-worker who complained about how long it takes to dry his hair, because if you go outside with wet hair you'll catch a cold. 1. No, you won't. 2. It was July. Sounds like something a parent would tell their kid to keep them inside after bath time. My mother has repeatedly tried to convince me that the dinosaurs were actually evil fallen angels that were then killed by God with a flood, not a meteor, and that believing that the dinosaurs existed is proof that God and Jesus exists. My mother is religious and believes that dinosaurs exist, but God got bored and did away with them so he could create humans instead. My younger neighbor got his girl pregnant a while back when they were still in high school, and she chose to take the abortion pill method because they weren't ready. When talking about it, he was like, yeah, she took the abortion pill and I guess threw all of the baby and pregnancy up. He was dead on so serious, lol. It was hilarious. Although, I had to break it to him the actual process and what his girlfriend probably went through. Quality education system. One of the dumbest things I remember a relatively bright person saying was in a social studies when we were studying one of the many awful periods in Russia history, and one girl said, well, if Russia was so bad, why don't the Russians just move? The title of every chapter in a Russian history text, and then it got worse. At a job I had years ago, one of the big bosses came in for a visit and decided to give us all a motivational talk. It was mostly the usual BS, but the line that stuck with me was, so if you keep aiming for the stars, you can reach the moon. To this day, I still can't tell if he wasn't aware how badly that means you have failed at your aim, or if we was implying that none of us have any hope of actually achieving the things we had hoped to. Better than aiming for the moon and reaching the stars. Check your background before firing, people. A close relative told me they can't go out anymore because the 5G is everywhere now and everyone is always on their cell phones and they can't handle the pain they experience in those areas. They have begun cancelling all their services. I know, that's not how that works. Most areas don't even have 5G yet. My brother-in-law climbs those towers. They work mostly with 3 and 4Gs, sometimes 5Gs. I was bartending and a grown woman walks up to me and asks, do you have liquor? There's a 3-tier shelf behind me full of liquor bottles. I would have looked behind you, then back at her a few times, then deadpan no. A dude I used to know argued that everything has a 50/50 chance of happening because it either does or it doesn't. A list of things I got him to say have a 50/50 chance of happening. Being struck by lightning, winning the lottery, being crushed by a meteor, being struck by lightning twice, getting into a car crash, being crushed by a meteor that only kills you and no one else, getting struck by lightning 3 times in a row, a toilet seat falling from the ISS and blowing your head off, being born into a wealthy family, choking to death on coffee, drowning in motor oil, winning 2 separate lotteries on the same day, being 7 feet tall, being 3 feet tall, and finally, being struck by lightning 100 times in a single day. That conversation stopped without me even being able to convince him. I'm sure he still believes it to be true. Don't convince him. Start making bets. I forget how this came up, but I was talking with my mom and she said shredded paper is lighter than none. I laughed, then I realized she was being serious, then we got into an argument about why that's false. A supervisor at my old job and myself were sat outside on the bench, smoking on break. I was quite new to the place and was getting to know people. We wasn't really talking to each other when he suddenly pipes up, do you think life may exist on other planets in the universe? Yeah, I do. Bit silly to assume our tiny blip of a planet is the only one, emo. Yeah, I do too. But no way do I believe in dinosaurs. A little shocked, I asked why and he simply said, I think those bones, quotation fingers in air, are just compacted dirt. I just stared at him for a few seconds, then laughed and walked back in the building. 2. Being asked how I learned to speak such good English for a second time after first time explaining I was from England. Both incidences occurred in the USA BTW. I got told by a lassie in a hot tub in Orlando that my English was excellent. I'm Scottish and I had already told her this. My mum's friend's mother was in her deathbed, so my mum's friend asked if my mum and my dad could come to the hospital to see her. Then my dad said the dumbest thing ever, can't she come to our house? That living in Manhattan means I'm super rich. Had to explain that there are poorer neighborhoods in Manhattan. They then switched to that I must live in the Bronx because only rich people live in Manhattan. Even with pulling out maps and tracing from Times Square to my place without living the island, still they don't believe it. I asked my ex one time if she wanted bacon and eggs for brekkie. She looks me dead in the eyes and says, AWH babe, you know I can't eat eggs. I'm lactose intolerant. She then proceeded to argue with me that eggs were somehow dairy. My uncle saying to me that you should always trust your government, especially the Prime Minister, without question. We had a conservative government at the time. We don't now, and, needless to say, he doesn't take his own advice. Haha. Some people just don't understand consistency. Back when VHS was superseded by DVDs, my best friend told me we had to rewind the DVD back to the beginning before returning to the video store. I was like, WTAF is she talking about? She totally tried to convince me and totally thought she was right. A girl in my sophomore year of HS, 16yo, said wait, Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii? I thought it was in Massachusetts. Yes, she believed that the Japanese flew across the entire continental US without being detected. I used to believe Hawaii was just a few miles off the coast of California when I was in middle school. Imagine my surprise when I realized it was in the middle of the Pacific. While under arrest and being interrogated, Edward Hollingsworth said to the detectives, the reason why I am here, my best friend's mom is dying of cancer. It's not a good reason, but that's why I am here. He was there to molest a 13-year-old boy. His screen name was Twink Toilet. This isn't someone else. This one is me. My friend played Big Iron. I, with full confidence, asked him if it was the Pee and Crap song. I think it is because I heard the meme from somewhere and never heard the actual song prior. I was in a tour of a rock quarry and one of the people on the tour wanted to know if they were ever going to run out of rocks. The guide looked at them and said, you mean, like, on Earth? I think it's a fair question. Sure, there's a lot of Earth, but there's only so much accessible material before it becomes more trouble than it's worth to extract from a particular location. I had a co-worker who thought that the river in our town was a lazy river like the ones at the water park. He wanted to spend a day floating in tubs and believed we would end up back at our drop-in point. I was just recently in the hospital for a week. Had to share a room the last 2 nights with an absolute idiot. He would scream on the phone to his family that the spike proteins from all the vaccinated people were causing his feet to hurt and his scrotum to enlarge. While riding shotgun in a former partner's car, I set the AC from vent to recirculate. He panicked and shouted, "Stop, the windows are closed and we'll suffocate." Bruh, he was around 20 at the time. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.